So we did chapter 8, which is talking about the publication process. It's split up into the editorial process and also the author's responsibilities. So for the editorial process, there's the peer review, and then either you get accepted or rejected of your manuscript. So for 8.1, it just talks about what a scholarly article is. So it's an original primary publication. It has been reviewed by a panel and contributes to the scientific knowledge of that journal in some way. When you are submitting a manuscript to a peer-reviewed journal, you are implicitly consenting to it being reviewed by all the peer reviewers and also discussion of the manuscript. And so during the process, the manuscript is confidential. So then you have editors who are the primary person who looks at the content and quality of the journal. They may have associate editors, consulting advisory editors, or ad hocs that can make recommendations, but the final editorial authority is in the editor. And then you have reviewers who put scholarly input and recommendations to the editor, but still the editor can choose to reject or use those recommendations. And reviewers are just assessing the scholarly quality. Sorry, just ate. Then you have some components of the peer review. So you can have a mass review, which means that you can hide your identity as the author from the panel, and that is your responsibility as the author to do that. And the mass review can also go both ways, so the panel can also be confidential as well. And not until both parties agree to review their identity, whether they do choose to or not, then it'll be reviewed. The timing of the review process, about 2 to 3 months. If it's past the 3 months, the APA publication manual recommends you contacting the editor to see where it is along the process. 8.2 is about the next process. So once the editor has reviewed, they can either choose to accept, reject, or reject with an invitation to revise and submit. If you are accepted, then no further changes can be made, and so the author must complete all their paperwork. If they don't, then they can be rejected. Reasons for rejection includes major flaws in the design study, or maybe lack of space, or it just is not very new knowledge and they don't want to include it into their journal. If you get rejected, then you cannot revise and then resubmit to the same journal. So you either have to find a new journal, a different journal, or new research. Then you have rejection with invitation to revise, and that means there is probably a major reworking that needs to be done. And so with that, they would give you a time constraint to fix all those flaws, and then the editors may or may not give you a reason why and of what to fix, and then the acceptance is conditional on if you make those changes or not. And then author's responsibilities is what we'll go through next. 8.3.
Hello. Okay, so now that we're preparing your manuscript for submission, we've got some technical types of details to go through. So first things first, before you submit, always look at your journal's website where you contact the editor. They'll have specific details on how the paper should be submitted, presented, and certain types of details of formatting. Just some quick insights. The quality of presentation, the way that you present it can either enhance the focus of it to look professional, or it can really detract, creating some level of misinterpretation of whatever your data is. So it's really key to just make sure that you hone in based on what the journal is asking for. Also, if scientific writing in English isn't something that is something that's either new to you, or if it is new to you, or if English, say, is a second language, there are options and certain types of resources you could use, like consulting with colleagues or copy editing services that would be able to kind of help you. You want to really bolster, your chances of getting published, and not detract just because of, some fact that you don't really understand or know all the different types of idioms that come with the English language, because it's a really fun language. Next, so this is a lot of words. I'll go through it as quickly as possible. So formatting. Typically, the typeface that we use is Times New Roman, say size 12 font. Fun fact, Serif is actually another typeface that you could use for text, and that actually helps reduce eye fatigue. Also, by using Times New Roman, and we'll get into like line spacing and margins, it actually helps editors or readers of your paper get a general idea of like the length of the paper just kind of by following these different types of standards, and just kind of like by eyeballing it. So special characters, use them, whether it be symbols, this didn't turn out, or Greek letters. It's best to use like what the actual like editorial program that you're using, or whatever kind of automated data is there. Try to go for letters, don't try to like spell things out. Line spacing, double space, margins, 2.5 centimeters. I know we're in the United States, that's 1 inch margins. Line length and alignment, 16.51 centimeters. And don't justify. Don't try to like line up all the margins on the, say, on the right-hand side so that everything's even and flush. That actually kind of throws things off and it changes the spacing between lettering. Paragraphs and indentations. Indent the first line for paragraphs and footnotes. The rule of thumb is basically 5 to 7 spaces if you're just half the space bar. Order of manuscript pages. Always use Arabic numerals. Don't use like Greek numerals or Roman numerals or any other kind of numerals. Just use Arabic. That's the typical 1 through 10 that we understand. Title page. There's 5 components. Title, running head, author's byline, institutional affiliation, and the author's note. We know that well. Abstract is going to be on a separate page, and that's going to be page number 2. Text usually starts, so like the body of your actual paper starts on page number 3. It's also a separate page. References, separate page on its own. Figures and tables each have their own separate pages, and then appendices separate page. I know this is stuff that you're used to as well. It's just kind of a reminder based on chapter 8. So, and page number running heads. For your running heads, 50 character total. So that's including all spaces, all letters. Don't use personal names because, like Diane was saying, if there is a master view and you use your name as, say, part of the running head or part of the title of your paper, well, that name's going to be eliminated. So then, you know, your title and your naming just won't make sense anymore. So don't use personal names like your own name. Automatic functions. This kind of goes back to use what your software program has already built in. Don't try to like manually generate all your spacing and things like that. Use the software as it's made to be used. Spelling check. I know it's simple. I'm sometimes a culprit of that, not doing spelling check, or just allowing spelling check to do it for me and then not going through realizing that it changed the word to something completely different that's not even a part of the English language. So, supplemental materials. So again, separate files for each. This is kind of like once you start submitting, you just want to make sure that as you're submitting materials, they're each named appropriately for what they are, that when somebody's looking at the attachments, that you know they're easily identifiable and they just kind of make sense in a certain order. Cover letter, refer to the journal's website, kind of like you would with formatting. And then also interim correspondence, so after you submitted it, if you have changes or corrections to make, just make sure that you have clear, concise correspondence with the editor, and always include a complete manuscript title along with authors' names, sorry, a little typo, and manuscript number, just so that you make it easy as possible for the person that you're corresponding with.
All right, so this is 8.4, more ethical, legal, and policy requirements. So ethical conduct and conflicts of interest. So if you are submitting a paper, you have to say, hey, I did this research on this med, and I have a financial agreement with this med institute, or I have a bias because my mom died from this disease. You have to make sure that you are able to have those in there. A really good figure for you guys to kind of list a bunch of these is 8.2 and 8.3 in your book, if you have any further questions. And then permission to reprint or adapted work. So it's not like what we're doing in our current writing, where it's like we took information and did a little lit review on it, but say I'm gonna take a table, a full piece of research from somebody else, I have to have it cited and obtain a letter of permission to use that much of that source. So like any big figures and tables that you use, any huge data sets, if you used a questionnaire that someone generated, or a vignette, or a test scale item, you have to also get a letter of permission for that. No written permission or fees. Sometimes you do have to pay a fee to use someone's stuff, but the only time you don't have a fee and you don't have to have written permission is if you're academic. So us, we're academic, scholarly, or non-commercial. It's if you only have 3 figures or less, then you may or may not have to get permission. You need to ask that individual. Or 5 figures from a whole book. As well as if you have a text extract that's less than 400 words, you don't need a letter of permission. But any more than 400, you do need to get a letter of permission. All right, so then permission policies vary between publishers. So I've told you the generic rule, but you are going to need to check with the publisher that you're working with to see what their rules are for permission letters. Also, you need to make sure to reproduce in all formats. So yes, you have permission to use my data in your hard copy journal, but if that journal goes online, then you know that permission letter isn't valid anymore. So you have to make sure it's permission in all formats. And also, don't do it the night before, because it takes a while to get a response and a permission letter. So give yourself several weeks, even to a couple months, to get that permission letter. And it doesn't matter how you get it, as long as it's a hard copy, fax, email, or mail. And if you have any further questions, section 2.12 has copious amounts of information on this. All right, so publisher policy requirements. So what happens is when you give over your work to a publisher, you then are giving consent and allowing the publisher to distribute your work, to control the reuse of that work, and to handle copyright paperwork. So I can't say, oh, okay, well this school wants to use my paper, I'm just gonna go ahead and give it to them. No, you have to agree with your publisher, you have to go through them from now on. And interesting note is that once you give it to a publisher, they own that copyright for 95 years. What? So if you live to be like 150, you may get copyrights back. Posting on the internet, so it also controls distribution to print and electronic. So if I give them a hard copy, but I want to post my paper to the internet for fun, you can't do that anymore because the publisher controls that as well. And if you haven't published your paper yet, but you still want to put it on the internet, you can, but you still have to say a date and say not yet published. So it's kind of what we did with our pyramid that we have for the review. We put unpublished document on there. If you have a research and it's funded through NIH, you have to provide PubMed with access to the research that you did if NIH funded it. That's the long name of the policy that they did. So essentially, you have to give them an electronic version of your peer-reviewed work within 12 months of the final publication. They have to have access to that.
So once your manuscript has been accepted, you would prepare your edited version. So when you prepare to send in the file, most publishers will request electronic files, but I guess that could depend on the publisher. So the book says you should always consult with their specific instructions for that specific journal. And it could be either email or submission. Once again, consult with the instructions. And then when reviewing the edited manuscript, once again, they'll probably require electronic files for that. And then you would ask yourself, are all the queries fully answered? Is there a hierarchy of headings? Is that correct? There's a checklist that's provided in the book that pretty much lays out every little piece of information that you might need that might have been edited or that you need to work on. So there are times when correction is needed, like something's already been published, and then there's an error that somehow slipped through the cracks. That happens. And so the book basically says that if you suspect there's an error, and this can be anyone, any type of article you read, you can propose a correction notice. So in order to do that, you would write the title, the year, the volume number, the issue, and the page number, and then you would include the precise location of the error, so what page it's on, what column it's in, and what line, as specific as possible. And then you would make the exact quotation of that error. And then this is the last part of this, of like our portion, is it basically is a checklist. I didn't include it here because it's pretty long. It's a few pages, but it basically goes through each of these categories. And there's about like 3 to 5 check marks for each category, just to be sure that like every little thing that we've all been mentioning is done. So like margins and headings and every little thing.
So we have some questions for you to test your attention span. Who has the final editorial authority?
Editor.
And can you list the 5 elements of the title page?
Running head.
Author.
Author's note.
Author's note.
That was the 5, yeah? Nice.
Thanks.
Congratulations, you were graded.
Good job.